Minister Ariel Sharon is the most guarded Israeli leader in history. Now, the threat to his life is perhaps less from Palestinians than from among his own people. While most Israelis welcome his negotiations with the Palestinians, his intention to remove the Jewish settlements from Gaza and parts of the West Bank has made him an enemy to many settlers and their supporters among Israel's extreme right. For them, the man who was once their most admired leader is nothing less than a traitor. The extreme religious right has daily confrontations with the Israeli police. They hope that anarchy and chaos will stop the political process. But the religious extremists have a greater long-term agenda, a war against the secular Israeli state itself, a vision of restoring the kingdom of Israel and rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. Tonight on Frontline, an investigation of a small but dangerous group of extremists who threaten both the peace process and Israel itself.
Only chaos can change the situation. The Israeli secular entity has to be destroyed. God can't reveal himself until it's all wiped out. As long as the state of Israel stays as it is, there will be no redemption.
Every November, tens of thousands of Israelis gather in Tel Aviv to honor the memory of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin received the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to reconcile with the Palestinians. In 1995, he was murdered by a Jewish religious extremist. Every November around the same time, people from the extreme religious right meet to commemorate the murder of a very different leader. Rabbi Meir Kahane was murdered in New York in 1990 by an Arab assassin. Born and raised in New York, he preached for violent Jewish self-defense. He emigrated to Israel and was elected to the Israeli parliament, where he called for the expulsion of all Arabs from the Holy Land. His racist views were so extreme that his party was outlawed, and in 1994, Kahane's party was declared a terrorist organization. But today, his ideas remain strong. Kahanist ideology has been adopted by several splinter groups. A small percentage of the Israeli population, several thousand strong, they are united by religious zealotry and ultranationalism. They oppose Israeli democracy and any peaceful dealings with the Palestinians.
If we want to understand Rabbi Kahane, his message was that we need to go to war because, in fact, what will bring our redemption is not prayer. What will bring redemption is war. But today we're going in exactly the opposite direction. Instead of war, there's peace now. There's an attempt to prevent war at all costs. And if we can force the army to go back to being offensive, an army of revenge, an army which cares about Jews more than anybody else, then we'll be able to bring the final redemption in the only way possible, through war. War now.
This is the West Bank, captured by Israel during the Six-Day War in 1967. The first settlements were built here for security reasons. Since then, settlements have expanded across the West Bank. More than 250,000 Israelis now live here. Some have come for economic reasons, good subsidized housing. Others are making a political and strategic stand. Many believe they are fulfilling their religious destiny, living on the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria. In the last 5 years, a new group of young radical settlers have illegally occupied over 100 remote outposts. Called the Hilltop People, they are one of the splinter groups who identify with the Kahanist ideology. They see themselves as pioneers, taking back the land of the Bible. One of the Hilltop People who emerged as a leader was Natanel Ozeri. Ozeri carried the Kahanist ideology to the hilltops. Hundreds of young men followed him to keep the land out of Arab hands. Together, they built outposts and trained in the use of weapons. In 2000, Ozeri took over Hill 26, which overlooks Hebron. Living in an isolated house with his wife and children, without electricity or running water, he embodied the ascetic ideal for the new hilltop settlers. Ozeri disdained Israeli law and believed that the Arab-Israeli conflict would be resolved only by war, a war triggered by settlers like him.
אנחנו מאמינים שיהודים צריכים לחיות בארץ ישראל. זה עניין של קידוש השם מול חילול השם. וזה רק עניין של זמן עד שהמלחמה בעזרת השם תתחיל, והיא תתחיל מאיתנו, ואז בסופו של דבר בעזרת השם נזכה גם לרשת את הארץ וגם להוריש את היושבים בה.
The hilltop settlers see themselves as the authentic Jews, true to their own interpretation of the Bible.
We're returning to the way it was before. We want it to be like it was before the diaspora, as this land was before the destruction of the Holy Temple. Back then, our people lived naturally in our own land, with the God's presence among us. And it was natural this was living. We're following our hearts. What we should be doing is all written in the Bible. We just read it in our weekly Torah portion. Expel the Arabs, kick them out.
Disputes between the radical settlers and their Palestinian neighbors are constant. In this case, a shot fired at the settlers provokes an instant response against the next Palestinian on the road. The Israeli army has to intervene. The radical settlers have weapons and military training. They believe that if they could do things their way, everything would be different. Unlike most settlers who accept the reality of living next to the Palestinians, the radicals claim an exclusive right to the land and everything that grows here. It's a message they're getting across to their neighbors, the Palestinian farmers, often with violence.
There are certain conditions, according to Jewish law, under which non-Jews may live here. This doesn't apply to the Arabs. They don't fit the category. They have to get the hell out. Whoever leaves under his own steam will save his own life. Whoever doesn't will have to pay the price. This is the land of Israel.
Antagonisms between the radical settlers and their Palestinian neighbors were fed by the Second Intifada, which started in late 2000. Palestinian suicide bombings killed hundreds of Israelis. While Israeli security forces tracked the bombers among the radical Palestinian groups, they also became aware of a pattern of random killings of Palestinians by Israeli civilians.